All right, it's 3:05, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Oops. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. This is now the final regional plan stakeholder meeting, or really any scheduled meeting that we have. My name's Cole Mullison. I'm a regional planner at the Coastal Regional Commission, and thank you all for being patient and sticking through all this. I know I've sent you probably about 500,000 emails by now. But you've given us great feedback on this, and so I just really appreciate y'all sticking with this and having these great discussions and all this great participation. It's very much appreciated. So this is the last scheduled meeting, but to reiterate, we're still going to be soliciting public feedback for the rest of the year. So if you want to have discussions with me, if you think any organization should be consulted about the plan, please let me know. And so with all that said, let's just get started. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing a bit of we're going to be talking about the implementation program for the regional plan. And we're going to start by just explaining what that is and what role it serves. And then we're going to get into an exercise where we have a list of work program projects, and we're just going to ask you to help us prioritize them. And then we're going to have a brief discussion about whether it would be good to pursue regional standards for local government comprehensive plans, if that's something we should go after or we shouldn't. And that won't take too long. And then finally, I'll just answer any questions that you might have about the work program or the regional plan generally. So that's the plan. First off, are there any quick questions about the regional plan? All right, I'll get started. So the implementation program is really what the regional plan is all about. This is the thing that actually provides an action plan for the regional commission, and it coordinates and provides guidance for the local governments of the region towards realization of the region's goals. And the regional work program is a list of activities and projects that the regional commission itself will attempt to pursue in the next 5 years. The performance standards are a set of guidelines for local governments to achieve, just to provide that guidance towards achievement of the region's goals. And finally, this is something that we may or may not pursue, depending on whether there's interest or it's considered a good idea or not. Local planning standards, additional elements that we as the regional commission would require for local governments in their comprehensive plans, and we can get into that in a bit. So those are the core elements of the implementation program. So starting off with the work program, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for all the feedback I've gotten on this. It's been really great and productive inputs, and it came across pretty clearly to me that that the work program as it currently is too dang long. So I was a bit hesitant at first to try to change things too much, just because in my personal experience of comprehensive planning, sometimes you kind of get punished for deviating too much from what you did the last time around. But I got to go ahead to take an axe to it, and that's what I did. It's about a fourth the size of what it was. It was maybe 120 items, and it's now about 37. So it's now much easier to read. Some sections were consolidated. A lot of things that weren't very actionable, that were more policy oriented, were cut. So there was a lot that was cut out. So it's entirely possible that in that cutting, some things that were important to you or that you think should be addressed were removed, and I want to make sure that all of those are still included. So if you see something missing from the current work program, please let me know. And a bit of a clarification on work program items. these are projects that are not meant to be our regular activities as the regional commission. So you won't find anything in there about just writing comprehensive plans or doing DRI reviews or anything like that, because that's sort of a given. We're going to do those regardless of what's in the work program. The work program are things that we're doing in addition to our regular activities. So we have a list here of 11 projects, and these were selected from the work program items because these are things that we think we can do just using staff time. They won't really rely too much on external partners or external resources. We think we should just be able to do these with just our DCA contract money. So our idea is that we're going to try to do one of these a year. And we want your input as to how to prioritize these and which ones are the most important and the most valuable to the region. So we're going to do an exercise where we're going to ask you to rank these for us. And once we're done with that, if there's any that is there anything you feel is missing that you think the regional commission could do using primarily staff time that would be of benefit to the region, please let me know. And we'll have time to talk about anything that's missing from this list after we do the ranking exercise. And these are just sort of proposals and ideas right now. So I'll go through each one of them, but we may not have fully concrete ideas on them because these are just proposals, and we kind of want your feedback on whether these should be pursued or how they should be modified when time comes for implementation. So I'm going to start with number 1, which is the tourism story map. Aaron, could you say a bit about this?
Hey, Cole, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sure. So the tourism story map was an idea that we had with our GIS team as well. It would be an interactive tool that for the region, and it would have historical markers on there, maybe key attractions in your communities that would be useful for online websites or kiosks. Hopefully an interactive tool to where you could click on a certain image on the map and it would either pop up additional information about that, or it could link to a website. So that's something that we've talked with some Department of Commerce and some visitor centers that would be useful for the region as you have tourists traveling through and they stop. They can see maybe if they're interested in walking trails or bike trails or bird watching or shopping, it would be an interactive map that would let them know what our region has to offer.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. So the next one that we're looking at is an environmental changes study, and I'm going to let Ryan tell you about this one.
All right, thanks. So yeah, the environmental changes study, we know that a lot of local jurisdictions, regional offices of state agencies, local academia have been doing research and planning around natural resources and all of the unique environment of the coast. So this would be essentially partially meta-analysis, partially additional research to kind of set up a baseline of existing conditions, existing practices, knowledge base, and being able to then use that as an evaluation point in the future. So are there gaps and inconsistencies from one jurisdiction to another in how they're handling conservation, mitigation strategies, resiliency measures, and again, most importantly, kind of painting that picture, a snapshot in time of where we are now, and if it's possible, maybe where we've come from since some of that work has been done in the past by some of the local governments, if it's already available to us. So next slide, Cole, please. The next potential work program item would be cost benefit analysis study. So the idea behind this one would be able to create a reference point, a best practice that any local government in the region could use when kind of evaluating alternatives, whether that is for maybe a NEPA requirement, a JEPA requirement, or even maybe when those laws aren't applicable, but there needs to be some sort of analysis of available alternatives to an action to justify what's going to move forward. So there are a lot of different ways that cost benefit analysis can be done for environmental services. There's a lot of different even within those different methodologies, there can be a lot of unique little quirks and how those things are figured. So again, similar to the last one, kind of taking a look at how it's being done in different parts of the region. Is it just being left up to an individual engineer firm or something like that? And kind of creating a regional standard that that can either be adopted or at least used as a reference point going forward, and then be able to be updated as maybe the specific cost values change.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Ryan. And another project that we were discussing is a regional water and sewer plan. We would identify where the public and private water and sewer systems in the region are and determine just how to best provide water and sewer services to the areas where we're projecting there's going to be growth. The next one is a set of regional transit studies that would just cover a wide variety of things, but primarily transit ridership across the entire region, all the transit systems that we have, Coastal Regional Coaches, Chatham Area Transit, and Liberty Transit. Also, sort of diving into where there's emerging transit systems, like in Statesboro and Brunswick, and where there also is potential for transit service. And just also where there's opportunity for connection, for connectivity and new routes, especially between cities. And also just looking at focusing on Coastal Regional Coaches, looking at peer systems throughout the country to determine how best we can optimize connectivity. And the next one is a local government services study, where we're basically just looking at what services each of our local government provides, and where the gaps exist, and possibly doing getting public feedback as to what sort of services residents are expecting from their local governments, and how local governments are meeting those expectations. And the next one is an evacuation coordination study, just looking at how different jurisdictions are coordinating their evacuation planning, just to avoid issues of congestion along highways due to a lack of coordination, causing them all to send their evacuees along the same route, that kind of thing. And the next one is just an inventory of threatened natural resources in coastal Georgia, where environmentally sensitive resources are expected to be impacted by development, where there's habitats of rare species, and how we can mitigate the damage to these natural resources. And also a manufacturing land use plan was in the work program, basically where we would determine sites appropriate for manufacturing and industrial facilities based on where brownfields are, where there's ecological resources, and also where existing infrastructure and public services exist, and also considering the transportation network. And another one was interstate corridor growth management plans for I-16 and I-95, just looking at how development, concentrated development along those corridors is impacting transportation and housing and utility infrastructure, and just how well comprehensive plans are guiding that development, and if there's conflicts and if there needs to be adjustments based on these findings. And finally, this was a suggestion from the 2016 regional plan, but it wasn't implemented. A transportation coordinating committee, which would be a coalition of local governments, metropolitan planning organizations, and transit providers in the region to coordinate transportation planning, improve transit connectivity, and avoid duplication of efforts, and just to provide a unified voice on transportation infrastructure needs to state agencies and federal agencies. So now we're going to do the ranking exercise. So you can do this on your computer, your smartphone. You're going to go to menti.com, menti.com, and use this number here, and you're going to rank these options. And I'm gonna. And I'm just going to, we're just going to wait for y'all to cast your votes and just see what the results look like. While we're waiting for you to, I guess, do the ranking, is there any questions? Are there any difficulties at getting to the Mentimeter website? The code is also right here. All right. Are there any questions about any of those projects? All right, looks like these are pretty interesting results. Okay, we got 25 people here, and we've got 14 so far. So we're more than halfway. Let's see. So there's definitely a lot of interest in the idea for looking at the development along the interstates and see how development has impacted public services there. And it looks like both of the the things that Ryan talked about are doing pretty well. Second and fourth was just at third a second ago. right, looks like a few people are still working. So we only have we got 19 out of 25, so that's pretty close. We'll give the others a few minutes to finish up if they're still working, but are there any ideas for things that aren't on here that's that could be projects for the regional commission to pursue that would be mostly focused on staff time, that would mostly just require staff time? All right. All right, think I'm gonna call it. You can continue to submit them, but I'm going to move on. So the next thing that we want to discuss here is the question of additional planning standards for local government comprehensive plans. So the State of Georgia Department of Community Affairs has its own list of requirements that all local government comprehensive plans have to follow, certain standards that they have to meet, and certain elements that have to be included in the plan, certain topics that have to be covered. In the regional plan rules, it does say that regional commissions can set their own planning requirements for local governments if it's in their comprehensive plan. So this is, I think, something that we should that we should consider for this regional planning process. I brought this up at the last stakeholder meeting, and there was some pretty, I think, some pretty positive response to the idea, but I want a little bit more feedback on it before we make a decision on whether to pursue that or not as an option. So first of all, it should be noted that as it seems like no other regional commission has actually gone through with setting their own regional planning rules. So maybe that's cause for hesitancy, but maybe that's also it's maybe also a benefit if we're going to be trailblazers in that regard, I guess. So we want to sort of consider the benefit to the community that mandating certain planning elements for the comprehensive plan would bring, and weigh that against any burden or difficulties that might cause for the local governments. So what was proposed? So two elements were proposed for new requirements: natural resources and cultural and historic resources. Natural resources used to be a state requirement, but that was removed. So in terms of setting our own standards, I think that would certainly be a very reasonable one to include, since it has been a state requirement in the past. So with natural resources, we're with both of these, we're really just looking at we really just want the local government to just identify what resources, natural resources or cultural and historic resources exist in the community and detail steps to protect and preserve them and just bring as much benefit to the community from these resources as possible. So with natural resources, we wouldn't really, I don't think we would really have specific rules for this, but we would sort of suggest that they look at things like water conservation, identifying environmentally sensitive areas, addressing stormwater management, what efforts are being made towards conservation, and potentially what impacts of climate change on the locality have been identified. And with culture and historic, we would probably be looking at sort of an unofficial inventory of resources, what historic preservation efforts there are, if they have historic preservation staff or commissions, if there are any recognized historic sites, and also just generally more towards the cultural side, what locations and assets are just very important to the community, and just what steps are made to protect and preserve those. Um, so first off, are there any questions about this? Like, is the idea of adding additional standards, is that sort of understood? Are there any sort of immediate thoughts about that? Okay. We're going to do a similar thing that we did with the previous one. We're also going to use Mentimeter to get your input on this. We're just going to do a poll on whether you think it's a good idea, whether either of these should be included or both of them or none, or as additional planning requirements. And so you're going to use this code here. You're going to go to menti.com and use this code here to do all that. So let me. My bad. 1 second. I'll pull up the. Okay, you're going to use this code here to vote on what you think about it, and also if you think there should be other local planning requirements that we're not listing here, and if you do think so, please specify what you think would be beneficial to communities. And I should clarify. So any decision that we make on this, it's going to come after a good bit of research and outreach to local governments and the Department of Community Affairs, and just review of what might be model elements for these two topics, to determine sort of what the burden would be for local governments. Would there be any extensive benefits for the community? I mean, we do think that this would, if nothing else, sort of start the right conversations, because sometimes cultural historic resources, natural resources are they're sort of right under your nose, so they're sometimes a bit in the background for planning efforts and for local governance. So we think that making sure that these are part of the considerations of the planning process would be beneficial, but we would need to do research and review of planning documents and consult with planners to make a good decision on this. All right. Well, there's not quite a majority, but it looks like that's probably all the responses we're going to get. So I'd say that's pretty favorable towards the idea of having these standards. So I think this is something that we will be looking into and see if it would be beneficial for our region and for our communities. Um, so finally, I just want to address performance standards. So these sort of function to help us understand what services local governments are providing, and we're just trying to ensure that our local governments are covering everything. Um, and it's not really meant to be a highly technical or rigorously monitored process. There are implementation updates every year, but we don't necessarily want detailed numerical thresholds for all of them, because there's not necessarily the capacity for a lot of our smaller local governments to expect specific documentation, because the median size of local governments in our region for both counties and cities is about 4,000. And if you're just looking at cities, it's about 2,500. So about half of our local governments have fewer than 2,500 people, and a good number of them have fewer than 500. So a lot of these governments are fairly small and have limited resources. So since this isn't really something that has doesn't have a very meaningful carrot or stick attached to it, we wouldn't want to put an undue burden on them um, by requesting very specific documentation. Um, are there any questions about the performance standards? Um, all right. So we are open to suggestions about how to make these more effective at guiding local governments to support the goals of the region, and we'd appreciate any thoughts or advice you'd have on those. But those are the so that's all of the elements of the implementation program. So that's everything that I wanted to cover today. Are there any questions on anything? Any thoughts about the regional plan? All right. Well, if hearing none, I'm going to call this meeting and say thank you very much for participating in this regional planning process that's been going on for the better part of a year, and it's going to continue to go on. But this is the end of our scheduled meeting. So thank you very much for all the discussions that we've had and all the input that you've given me. It's really helped to help us shape something together that we think is going to be beneficial for the region and help guide planning in the region. So thank you very much for that. Um, so I'm just going to say have a great afternoon, and thanks for participating. And if you do have questions, I'll stay on to answer any.